Before the shell and the heart could ever see each other, they could hear each other. Music, it was the first shared language. It's really the only place where the mathematical rule of the shell and the chaotic feeling of the heart aren't at war. Instead, they're in a dance. And this is the story of that dance. So, let's dive into it. At the turn of the 20th century, the established rules of music didn't just bend, they absolutely shattered. And this wasn't just some small change in style, it was a fundamental rewiring of how music even worked, creating a sound that was going to change everything. To really understand this eruption, we first have to look at the cracks that were already forming in the old world, in the established structure of Western music, what we're calling the shell. Okay, so for centuries, right, Western music ran on this pretty predictable system of harmony. But by the late 1800s, you have composers like Wagner just stretching that system to its absolute breaking point. The music got super uncertain, really tense. Then, by the time Schoenberg comes along and formalizes atonality, well, the old shell had just become so elaborate, so top-heavy, that it basically collapsed under its own weight. And this had a massive effect on anyone listening. See, our brains are basically prediction machines. They love learning the rules of a musical style and getting that little dopamine hit from anticipating what's coming next. But this new atonal music, it offered zero predictable patterns. For most people, their brains just couldn't latch onto anything. It just sounded like random, unpleasant noise. The shell itself was unstable. But right as that old structure was starting to crumble, something new, something powerful, the true heart erupted from the margins, and it came specifically from African American communities in the United States. This was the blues, and this was not about intricate, complex rules that you had to study for years. No, this was all about raw feeling, about spontaneous creation, pure emotion, and all of it was held inside this incredibly simple, repeating 12-bar structure. That simple shell gave the heart all the room it needed to just let loose. And when you put them side by side, the difference is just, wow. The old shell was all about perfection, about structure, hitting those precisely correct notes written on the page. The new heart was about making it up in the moment. It was about blue notes, those expressive, soulful sounds you find when you bend a note in the cracks between the piano keys, and syncopation, rhythms that pushed and pulled against that steady beat. So how do you think the shell, the cultural establishment, reacted to this powerful new sound? Well, this wasn't like the folk music they'd absorbed in the past. They couldn't just correct the blues and fit it neatly into a symphony. The errors, the bent notes, the weird rhythms, that was the entire point. So since it couldn't be fixed or controlled, it was attacked. First, it was just dismissed as disorganized, chaotic, simply noise. Then it was rejected as being unsophisticated, primitive. And finally, because of where it came from and its raw, uninhibited emotion, it was actually feared as a moral threat to the social order. Dangerous. And what's wild is there's a real scientific reason for this kind of backlash. Our brains work by trying to minimize prediction error. When we hear something totally new, totally unexpected, the brain sends out this powerful surprise signal. But for a brain that had absolutely no framework for the blues, that massive dose of surprise didn't feel exciting. It felt unpleasant. It even felt threatening. But this music was just too vital, too alive to be ignored. From the blues, jazz was born. And jazz forced the old shell and the new heart onto the same dance floor, in public, where nobody could look away. What jazz did was create this live conversation between chaos and order. It took the improvising soloist, the heart, and put them on equal footing with the band's complex harmonic structure, the shell. For the very first time, these two forces were partners on the same stage, negotiating their dance in real time. And this is just fascinating because it fundamentally rewired how people listened to music. The game was no longer about predicting the grand architecture of some 30-minute symphony. Now your brain's prediction engine was focused right on the immediate future. You were engaged in this rapid-fire tango with the soloist, constantly asking, okay, what's coming next? So the shell, of course, it fought to contain the heart's new rhythm, but the heart always broke the form. And with every single broken rule, a new, more flexible shell was born to hold that new chaos. The shell was listening, and it was learning. It was becoming aware of the heart's pulse, absorbing this new dance into its own code, not even knowing it that this shared rhythm was the very bridge that would one day unite them.